Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Boxscore Geeks Show. I am Patrick Minton, and I am joined by the voice of God and the face of God. You're on screen, right, Brian?
I am, yeah. I
Brian
like being the
Foster,
face of God. Yeah, that sounds
the
even
face
better.
of God.
I don't
If
know what
any of you
that
are Path
means.
of Exile players,
Oh, is that a Path of Exile thing?
there's a character in Path of Exile who
Oh,
raises his
cool.
fist and he does this like fist slam attack, and he's like the touch of God. Anyway, Brian's in control. Brian has all the keys to the kingdom. He runs it all. He does great work. So say hi to everyone, Brian.
Oh, yeah. No, good evening, Patrick and everyone. This is the trade deadline special. We waited a couple days. We got all these trades in, and we're going to talk about as many of them as we can in the next, 40 minutes or so. And, yeah, a lot of trades, but I heard some people saying this wasn't a very big trade deadline. Not a lot of high-impact ones, but still, I think, really interesting trades that tell us a lot about the mindset of different teams.
Yeah, not any huge. I mean, I guess the DeMarcus Cousins one is the biggest one to be kind of a bomb. Although it feels like he's been in the trading block for 3 years. It doesn't feel as exciting to me but if I remember, nothing really big happened last year at the trading deadline either, did it? I mean, it feels like all the big stuff happens in the offseason. So is
I
there
want
something
to
I'm
say
forgetting?
that means teams are wising up and not doing these crazy, Charles Barkley style deals, but we know that's not true.
Well, yeah, and at the trade deadline, you more or less know where your team is, and no trade you're going to make is going to make a big move unless if you're like a 40 win, if you're on a 500 pace and you can somehow swing for LeBron, okay, yeah, that's going to move you up. But otherwise, even if you acquire a player who's much better than your current player, there's only like 30-ish games left, 25, 30 games left. So if you prorate, wins, that's only going to get you an extra one or two wins, right?
For sure. And
So,
actually, that's going to be one of my biggest disappointments is that since all these trades happened today and yesterday, we haven't had time to read all the local reporting about the mindset of the teams and are they trying to tank? Are they trying to push for the playoffs? So we don't have all that in our heads yet, but we
right.
can
So,
look at
so,
the trades
yeah.
on their own level.
If you're a team who's in the playoff race, but you're trying to up and be a contender, it's really hard because you have to give up something to get something. So if you're already in the playoff race, how do you make the leap to contender without giving up anything? That's kind of hard. And so there's just a lot of it just doesn't make as much sense to trade now. Whereas in the offseason, you get all these teams who are completely gutting their rosters. They're rebuilding. You got other teams that are trying to go from rebuilders to contenders, etc. There's so much more.
Front offices know they have at least a year and maybe not, like 2 months before they get fired or whatever. So
Yeah, and you also everything feels so new. You have potential, right? Whereas now your team's played 50 some games and you pretty much know what your team's going to do for the rest of the season.
2018 and the Kings are a contender, right, Patrick? That's how we're going to be looking at things next offseason, right? It's a clean slate.
It's a clean slate. Let's go with that. It's just clean slate. Okay, let's talk some sports ball trades, shall we?
Let's do it. Do we want to get into the first one?
Yeah, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So the first trade was Oklahoma City and Chicago. So Chicago traded Taj Gibson and Doug McDermott for Cameron Payne, Jeffrey Laverne, who I always think of the Game of Thrones guy when I hear that guy's name, and Anthony Morrow, and a 2018 second-round draft pick. What do you think of this trade, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. Oklahoma City always pays their debts when it comes to trades, and this time Joffrey ended up on the block. But so this is one of these trades are kind of listed in reverse chronological order and in terms of interest. This one kind of just went down today, and I can't figure out what Oklahoma City is trying to do here. Joffrey, whatever, he's a young player, doesn't have any minutes.
So it's the Oklahoma City side that confuses you here?
No, why did Chicago want these Oklahoma City players?
Okay, so
Oklahoma City screwed up, I think. Chicago screwed up. No, this is just all bad. So let me start over again. So Taj Gibson is not having a great year, but he's an established veteran, right? And has been good in the past. Like Oklahoma City, who is, gunning for the playoffs. Gibson has been a good player and he could help them. McDermott, nice young player who's pretty young still and is going to improve and has done a little bit. These Oklahoma City guys, though, Morrow is fine, but he's a specialist, like a second-round pick. Like, what does Chicago want with all these Oklahoma City assets? That's what I'm wondering.
This totally feels like Chicago is just trolling Jimmy Butler here. I mean,
Oh,
I
I
don't
like
understand
that.
how this gets this team any better. I don't see what there is in the there's no rebuilding in here. There's no like future proofing here. Doesn't improve them this year. I don't get it. I mean, Cameron Payne has played what, maybe 1,500 NBA minutes in his career so far and has stood out in zero of them. Um, King Joffrey, I don't know what you see in that guy. I just I feel like the best player coming from Oklahoma City in this trade is Anthony Morrow, which
For sure.
tells you a lot,
Yeah.
right? And it just seems like a real big head scratcher to me. It's like, if you want to rebuild, then trade Jimmy Butler. If you don't want to rebuild, then why make these ridiculous trades that, and in the most positive light, all this does is shuffle deck chairs, and that's the most positive light. I don't get it at all. Doesn't make any sense to me.
I'm with you. We're not doing our crying Jordans gimmick that much for this show, although I have a few of them on screen. But yeah, definitely the Jordans will cry in Chicago about this one for sure. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't have too much to say on that other than more like Game of Thrones memes. Just Chicago tried, I guess. They tried to move Jimmy Butler, which seemed dumb. It was smart they didn't do it. So really, they won the trade deadline just for not moving Jimmy Butler. But
maybe it depends. Like, do we know what people offered? Right.
That's
depends. True. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's very hard to get value for a star, but one could imagine that the Celtics maybe put a hell of a lot on the table. Who knows? Right.
Yeah. So I feel like I read Jay Crowder was a deal breaker for them in some trades. I don't know if it was this one specifically.
As it should be, right? There's no point in acquiring Butler if you have to give up your other great players, because then you don't improve, right?
Yeah, if I'm Chicago, if I'm giving a Butler to the Celtics, I'm saying I want Jay Crowder and Isaiah Thomas. I want them both. And they would say, you're crazy. I'll never give you that. But I think he's worth it. Like,
he totally is. But the problem is it doesn't improve the Celtics. So why would they do that?
That's right. I mean, neither team would do it, but the
only way the Celtics are going to get the big sort of MVP caliber star they need to take it to the next level is in the offseason, in my opinion. They're gonna have to wait for a situation like the one that arrived in Minnesota, where they can give up a bunch of young assets, because they got a lot of them. Like they have the Nets picks and stuff. They got shitloads of assets, right? So who knows? That might happen in the offseason. Moving on. Washington acquired Bojan Bogdanovic and Chris McCullough from the Nets for Andrew Nicholson, Marcus Thornton, and a 2017 protected first-round pick. And I forget what the level of protection on this is, but I think it's protected so much that this is almost assuredly going to become a second-round pick. So,
yeah, that's right. I want to say it's top 18 protected, or is that a different trade? I've been reading about a lot of trades today.
Well, the Nets, I actually don't know what the deal is with this, because the Nets don't even have their own pick this year.
Yeah.
So this pick, I think, is a pick for another team.
Let me say one thing about this. So I have the ESPN trade tracker up right here that says that, but all the articles I'm reading say the Nets are getting the pick from Washington. So, yeah. So basically,
yes. I'm sorry. I totally read it on the Nets.
No, I agree with you. I think
you're right. I think it's at least lottery protected. I think it's more, and I think it's depending on how the protection scheme runs, this might turn into a second round pick. So anyway, the Nets they're taking a flyer on Andrew Nicholson, I guess. I mean, So the thing about this is, if you're a team like the Nets, who have no assets on their own, right? They didn't have any picks or anything. The only way you're going to get any is to do things like what Philadelphia did a few years ago when Hinkie started, which is to take on terrible contracts. And Andrew Nicholson is definitely a terrible contract, right? He's got one of those mid-level contracts that goes like 4 years or something.
But he's not a rotation level player at all.
Exactly. But I mean, he's exactly the kind of bad contract you have to take in order to bribe somebody to give you a draft pick. You understand what I'm saying? I mean, it's basically Washington's like, please take Andrew Nicholson, and Brooklyn says, sure, if you throw in a draft pick. I mean, that's how these kind of trades go, right? So that's, I think, exactly what's going down here, and I can't really blame. I don't know if I can blame either side on this one, really. Marcus Thornton feels like a player you could kind of wait on, but
I want to say he's gotten waived already.
Yeah, I mean, the Nets are obviously going nowhere and desperately need to get as many just bribe, steal, or beg to get draft picks in any way they can. So it's fine. I mean, Nicholson's going to be terrible for a few years, but so are the Nets, so they shouldn't care that he's on their roster. I think it's fine. And then maybe in 1 or 2 years you can throw Nicholson into a trade to make the money work. Right? Who knows?
There you go. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those shuffling deck chairs kind of trades that Andrew was talking about last week. I don't think any of these players,
this
really
is purely about the draft pick. I mean,
that's right. The pick is the only valuable part of this trade. Yeah. So I think the Nets clearly won the trade.
Yeah.
But it's a small victory,
right? It's certainly valuable for Washington to get rid of a bad contract for a pick that's probably wasn't going to be too high anyway, right?
Actually, I like that point. Maybe it is better for them, and maybe I was swayed by some of the reporting saying Washington looking for depth and bring in Bogdanovich, and come on, he's just the guy you want very deep in your depth. But despite his awesome name,
and then
Bogdanovich is not that good.
Once you get to the playoffs, the only depth that matters is your sixth man, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so next, the Raptors and the Suns have done a trade. The Suns sent P.J. Tucker and got back Jared Sullinger and two second round picks. Okay, that makes it a little better, but I still think they got fleeced here. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the most one-sided trades for sure that we've seen. Although that being said, again, it's not a very high impact trade, but here's what I mean by that. Let's go to the board here. So PJ Tucker is the Suns' best player, and they haven't been awful this year. Their roster's not that great. They have a lot of young players. They've kind of hung in there in the West, but PJ Tucker is their best player, and they just dumped him. So I don't know. Maybe it was one of those things where we're not contending this year, so we're gonna trade you to a contender. Maybe they just wanted some value before his contract expires. I don't know.
Plus, Sullinger doesn't seem to make any sense given that they in that particular in the front court they're pretty set, right? I mean they got Alex Len and they got well actually I guess they got a lot of old players besides Alex.
Yeah, they have really old and really young players.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about this. I think this gets a big ass shrug from me.
It does.
I don't really know what to say about this trade. The fact that it's 2 picks kind of interesting, but they are second round picks. So with picks, it's always a question of what is your front office going to actually do with them. It feels like for instance, the Celtics. I feel like the Celtics do a great job trading their picks, but a terrible job using their picks to draft people. So it's always a question of, okay, what's Danny Ainge going to do? Is he going to trade with them or is he going to draft with them? Because if he's going to draft with them, it's like, yikes. You're going to get a bunch of players that have people scratching their heads, right? I remember that year they drafted 4 shooting guards with their 4 first-round picks, and everybody's like, what's going on?
Yeah, okay. It's got to be one of those scenarios where maybe P.J. Tucker and his agent said, hey, Suns, what's going on? Are you my part of your long-term future? I want to be on a contender. And they're like, okay, the Raptors, that's a contender. And I think that's the bottom line with this trade, right? The Raptors get a really productive player, a guy who I think is a difference maker and can help them face the Cavs in the playoffs. So this is one of the more impactful trades.
I feel like lately it's we keep saying it, man, but the first rule of NBA Trade Club is don't get on the fucking phone with your Masai. Don't trade with Masai. That's a first rule of trading with Masai. Don't trade with Masai.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm really starting to like the Raptors, and if I were in Vegas right now, I would definitely be looking at what are my odds on the Raptors winning the Eastern Conference, because with the addition of Ibaka, I really like them because the Cavs have injury concerns and the Raptors are just a good all-around team. I'm pretty high on the Raptors. I'm higher on the Raptors than I am on the Celtics, but we'll get back to that in a different podcast.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Love could be back for the playoffs, I think. He's 6 weeks out after his surgery. I can't remember exactly, but he's a question mark, though, right? He's missed.
Yeah, and when you come back from surgery, you're not fresh. You don't have fresh legs. Right. You're not 100%.
I hate to oversimplify
when
things.
Kevin Love got injured, it was definitely a blow to my portfolio because the Cavs are a big reason.
Yeah.
Why you take the field against the Golden State Warriors to win the title, right? So,
well, let's look at the last 2 times these 2 teams faced in the finals. Last year, Kevin Love was there, and he played amazing, and they won. The year before he was hurt, and they didn't win. So It's more obviously a lot more complicated than that, but that was a big factor. So, yeah, I mean, bringing in
let's not
all these
discount
players.
that Irving was also missing the year before, and Irving couldn't miss a shot in the last 2 games of that series.
No, I don't know if I have the stat perfect or not, but one of the stats I remember from that series was Irving's contested field goal percentage or true shooting was something similar to Curry's like wide open shooting in that series. So it was
no, he shot completely out of his mind.
Like, shot out of his mind.
There were so many shots that like Klay Thompson was right there in his grill, and it just, who cares? It goes in. It's like, whatever. And that's the kind of thing that has to totally drive a GM or a coach completely bonkers. It's like, you did everything right and you lost anyway.
And we said this last week. The Raptors probably would have been better served just keeping Biyombo instead of, having to bring in Ibaka now. But, that being said, like, they're making up for that mistake, and the Raptors are looking strong.
Raptors are looking good. Okay, next one, and this is a big one for me. I like this one. Sorry, I like it. In terms of I want to talk about this, I like this one. It's a big one. The Mavs have acquired Nerlens Noel for a first-rounder, which was probably going to become a second-rounder, Justin Anderson, and Andrew Bogut. That's a very interesting trade. Let me get your thoughts first on that one, Brian.
Yeah, this one is tough. So one thing is we're, scratching our heads about the 76ers, right? They've gone from the process, which we've talked about a lot. We liked and disliked things about what Hinkie was doing, mostly disliked towards the end. And now they're bringing in, the Colangelos, and we're thinking they're probably going to run this ship into the ground. And this trade is kind of an indication they're doing that, right? So they have this big logjam of young big men. Sorry to be redundant in that sentence, but they need to figure out what to do with it, right? And this doesn't seem like the beginning of the right way to deal with it. Noel has been probably the best out of all those guys, even better than Embiid, who we've talked a lot about, but Noel's, again, he's a really solid defensive player. Like, to see a big man that can block shots, get steals, and rebound like that, you don't see those guys very often, right? Like, I'm not going to say he's, going to be a young Ben Wallace, but you're like, maybe there's something there. So to just kind of move him away instead of some of the other guys, probably a mistake for the 76ers. They should have been working, at least a year, from now in the past to try to work on keeping him, and it seems like they've been moving towards trading him. And, obviously they're not going to do a lot with Bogut. He's in his 30s, probably wants to go play on a contender, so they'll probably move him out. I mean, I don't know. It's maybe they had to do it, but it seems like they could have done a better way.
Yeah, this is a interesting. So I think let me first say I think this is a bad trade from Philadelphia. However, I probably don't think it's as bad as you think it is, but because they do have a logjam there at the front court, and they have a pretty terrible, backcourt aside from TJ McConnell, and they needed to do something. In a perfect world, you would trade Jahlil Okafor for something, right? Because he totally seems like, not only on this team seems like the odd man out, but also kind of in the modern NBA, he seems like the odd man out, because I feel like Jahlil Okafor, we're looking at a best case scenario of like Al Jefferson, which is like also a guy who just doesn't fit into the NBA in the in the 21st century kind of, right? It's like he might have been a lot more valuable in the 80s or the 90s, but he's not, his skill set just isn't great in the current NBA. But the problem is nobody wants Jahlil Okafor for that very reason, right? Like he's a second-year player who was for a while was in contention for Rookie of the Year. Probably would have won Rookie of the Year if he hadn't gotten injured. And your return for that player is going to be pretty marginal. So I think they kind of decided we got to get rid of somebody, and nobody will take Jahlil Okafor, so let's keep that one. And people will give us something for Noel, so let's trade that one. Plus, Noel's going to be a restricted free agent. They missed his entire first year, obviously, and they didn't really get sort of the maximum return on rookie contract from him that they should have. Having said that, I agree with you. Noel is with all the injury concerns and stuff, that's a big deal. But this reminds me a lot of back when everybody thought Tyson Chandler's career was over because of injuries, and the Dallas Mavericks said, fuck it.
Love that comparison.
The Mavericks just said, fuck it. We got good doctors and good trainers. We trust them. We'll take it. We'll take a flyer on them. And then a couple of years later, there was a title. I think this is a very good trade for the Mavs. I think it's a pretty bad trade for the Sixers. Kind of understandable where they're coming from. I still think they could have gotten more in return, and also, either they could have gotten more in return, or they should have just, sat on it and waited, right? Feels like, because this first rounder is protected enough that it's almost assuredly going to be a second rounder by the time they cash it in, right? So you're talking a second
This
rounder.
might be the top 18 protected pick, actually. Yeah, that'll be my quest. Figure out which of those trades.
I'm pretty sure this one will almost assuredly become a second rounder.
Okay.
So because I think it's protected for next year and then becomes a second rounder, and given Dallas's current standings, that they're not going to get it this year. So what they traded Noel for a late first, early second round pick maybe, and a marginal young wing player in Justin Anderson, and then a guy that they're going to cut, right? So he's going to help him get to the salary floor, and that's about it, right?
Yeah, and from the Mavs. Oh, go ahead.
Like, I feel like Noel is worth more than that. Oh, and I guess the other thing we brought up in the pregame show, we were talking about this, like, by trading Ilya Silva, they finally cleared up some of that logjam, and Noel would have probably started playing more minutes in their front court, especially given that Embiid will probably continue to be on a minute restriction. And I think he's actually currently injured again too. Anyway, right? So if there's a player on that roster where your injury concern should be the greatest, it's definitely not Noel. It's Embiid, right?
That's right.
So it just to me it doesn't seem like a great trade.
No, I'm with you on that. And, it's probably good from the Mavs' perspective for this reason. The reason I say it's not a total win for them is they are not a contender this year, right? Like, you expect them normally to be in the playoffs every year. Like, they've been one of the most consistently good franchises ever since Cuban took over.
Well, but they haven't been ever since that, disastrous offseason after that last title. They haven't been.
That's true, but
that was like,
in recent history, they haven't been
5 years ago.
But anyway, the point of it is, right, Noel's not going to help them with a playoff or title run this year. What they're really doing is getting his bird rights and spending the next half of the season, trying to bring him into the culture and convince him they want to re-sign him.
In this case, it's not the bird rights, it's the restricted free agency rights.
Oh,
which is subtly different, right?
Good point. So what, explain that, like, because it's the year he is in the league, right, basically?
Well, bird rights would mean if he were an unrestricted free agent. Bird rights would mean you have the ability, permission, option, whatever, to go over your salary cap in order to sign the player, right? So, for instance, Dirk Nowitzki, they have his bird rights. So, if Dirk Nowitzki wants a max contract, they can give him a max contract, even if it puts them over the salary cap. That's when you have a player's bird rights. Restricted free agency rights just means you have the ability to match an offer anybody else makes, including if that offer would put you over the bird rights, but it doesn't give you the ability to just straight up offer them a deal that would take you over the salary cap. I don't think, unless I'm wrong about that. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but paging Larry, right? But it's a subtle distinction, and maybe this also includes his bird rights, because I think the way bird rights are calculated are similar, but the bird rights aren't relevant until after he has enough
years of service, right?
Well, after his next contract, right?
Right.
He'll become an unrestricted free agent after his next contract.
There we go. So. Still, though, I guess the only point is the Mavericks have some work to do for this trade to really pay off, right? In terms of working with Noel and his agent.
Sure.
It doesn't pay off for them right away, since this is kind of a lost season for them. Still, though, like, Bogut's not going to help them at all. Like, he's a short-term guy for them. Justin Anderson, whatever. Seems like
I think Justin Anderson is actually an upgrade, right?
Yeah.
He brings an upgrade on the wing.
Their backcourt was just that
because
bad.
Their backcourt's terrible.
Yeah.
Right? So we'll see. I mean, and Dario Saric just definitely looked a lot better in 2017 than he did in 2016. So we'll see. I'm optimistic that the team can pull out my 27 wins that I need from them.
There we go.
More than that, I don't know. Let's look at two other teams, the Lakers and the Rockets, who have done two trades. The first trade was Lou Williams in exchange for Corey Brewer and a first-round pick. Again, heavily protected first-round pick. In fact, I think that's going to be like again, also probably going to turn into a second round pick. Dre wrote an article about this yesterday. This is the new Lakers seem to be like the old new Lakers. And by that we mean like all of the Lakers since Jerry Buss has died. It seems like the magic in the Lakers franchise really was with Jerry and not with the organization as a whole. So I don't know. This seems like a terrible trade, right? I mean, I know Lou Williams is not part of their big future plans, but he certainly was their best player. And by the way, I understand how much of a scary statement that is if you're a Laker fan. What they got back was a player who was terrible, who spent his entire career being terrible, and yet somehow keeps getting jobs in the NBA. Sort of a marginal draft pick. And as you mentioned, for the Rockets, the win is just getting Brewer off their roster, right? That's a big win for them. So this looks like a great trade for Houston and a terrible one for the Lakers. In a separate trade, they swapped Marcelo Huertas for Tyler Ennis, which I feel like I'm going to pull out the shrug emoji for that one again. Nobody really cares. And then separate from all of this, big news this week, they fired Mitch Kupchak, who's been there for 3 years. My personal take on the Kupchak firing is that it doesn't make any sense to fire him until you see how he is without Jim Buss, because it feels like it doesn't feel like Kupchak's been really the one making the decisions the last 5 years. It feels like it's been Jim Buss. So just feels weird to fire him. But I guess you had to because you're bringing on Magic Johnson, and Magic being Magic, he probably wanted a clean slate. So anyway, let's talk about this. How do you feel about the trade? How do you feel about Magic Johnson? How do you feel about Marcelo Huertas becoming a Rocket?
It looks like he is going to get waived by them, unfortunately. They're bringing in all these guys in trade, so he's not going to make their roster. But there's a lot to say on both sides. Maybe you want to start with the Rockets first, I guess, because That's a little less complicated. It's just great for the Rockets, right? They're bringing in, Patrick Beverley has been a little bit dinged up. And some of their other, Harden's been playing all these minutes. So bringing in a couple of...
And I feel like Lou Williams is a great fit for D'Antoni's system, by the way.
Yeah. He's a guy that can guard point guards, but, doesn't need the ball in his hands as much. He can maybe receive passes from Harden. So
I'm just saying he totally fits the whole 7 seconds or less. Right? I mean, if we're up to Lou Williams, is probably like 7 seconds. It's a fucking eternity. But whatever.
Do you think he's gonna ever hold on to the ball as they try to do a handoff with Harden? They're just like, no mine.
No mine.
So, and they remind me, they brought in another pretty good guard from a different trade, right? Houston made a ton of trades. I think it's a trade we didn't have on the list here, but anyway, they brought in a few good players, and they're already the third best record in the West, and they've been looking pretty good. These seems like, pretty solid trades overall for Houston. It is a first-round pick, maybe. That doesn't seem like a big loss for Houston since it's going to be a low pick. And on top of that, they're getting a player that's worth more than a pick, probably. They're, trying to make a title run now. So, yeah, it just seems great for the Rockets, I guess, before we get on to the Lakers.
Agreed. No question.
There we go. So Lakers, on the other hand, yeah, again, maybe even though Williams is the best player in this first trade, I don't think the second trade matters that much, really. It seems like salary cap kind of stuff. The Lakers are trying to get something for Williams, who's probably just going to be gone, right? He's, again, probably a guy who's like, what are you guys doing here, Lakers? Am I part of your plans? No. Okay, then get rid of me. Let's just do it now. That's probably what happened. So, and as far as Dre's article goes, I guess let's just go straight into Magic, right? Let's talk Lakers front office if you want. I guess the trades are fine for the Lakers, good for the Rockets.
So so here's my thing about Magic. It's really hard to tell with Magic if anything he says publicly reflects anything he's thinking inside of his head. Because he seems to me like the type of player who's always putting on a mask when he's in the public, right? Who's always putting on that genial, totally uninsulting, no matter who the hell you are type of front, right?
Yeah.
And so everything he says in every interview, Feels like it comes out of the Bull Durham sports cliche book, and everything he says as a commentator on ESPN or whatever always feels like he's not trying to say anything controversial. He's saying a bunch of things that just totally represent sort of the conventional wisdom of everyone, and so it's hard to say if any of that reflects how he actually thinks about basketball. Like by some third party accounts, he's actually a totally merciless, cutthroat competitor. Well, I mean, he'd have to be, right, to be the all time great that he is. But whether any of that translates to the front office, if there's actually a keen basketball intellect lurking there somewhere, behind that mask of a guy who says that the only way the Cavs and the Warriors don't play in the playoffs is if neither one makes the playoffs. It's just it's really hard to tell because everything he says as a commentator, I'm thinking, wow, this guy, one of the greatest players of all time, but one of the weakest minds of all time, if any of that reflects his actual thinking.
And not much of a coach either, right? When he had the
right. So we're going to have to wait and see, I think, how this develops. We're really gonna have to wait and see whether this is, the case of a guy with a great basketball mind or a guy who had all the talent and just didn't really know why he was great, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes based on his commentary, it almost sounds like Magic Johnson doesn't quite understand why Magic Johnson was the best player in the NBA of all time, right? The things he has said about some players, but again. Some of that could be political, right? All of the hyperbole he said about Kobe could just be because he's a Laker for life and because he didn't want to, insult anyone in the Kobe camp. And some of the ridiculous things he said about so many players could just, again, be because he didn't want to make any enemies. But I think to be a great general manager, you got to piss some people off. And I'm not sure if Magic Johnson's going to do that or not.
No, you're right. There's a lot going on here. So first off, I don't know if you were directly responding to this, but in Dre's article, there is a tweet from Baxter Holmes, and I'll just read it out real fast, only 140 characters, right? Magic on trades. Our untouchables are young talent right now, and there's been people that have been calling for them, but we've said no. And Dre's, lights into that quote and says, oh, that's bad, and basically that...
But maybe that's just him trying to hype up his young talent, right? So
exactly. I think that's possible, because he's not going to...
You have to wait for
he's
quite a while.
He's not going to devalue his own assets. So I don't totally agree with Dre here.
If I just took over the Brooklyn Nets, I'd be sitting there talking about how Jeremy Lin is fucking untouchable. Don't even come at me with Jeremy. Jeremy Lin's the best, right? I mean,
Brooke Lopez is George Mikan, right? I mean, you have to pump up your players.
Yeah, you got to pump up your own players. Yeah, of course he's going to say something like that. Now, whether he privately thinks that, who knows? And like I said, Magic Johnson has a long history of saying things that are, they're ridiculous if you think he really meant it. But it's so hard to say, man. Magic Johnson he has been a public figure for so long that he's like the Russell Wilson of the NBA. He's like every interview he gives, he is the consummate politician diplomat, right? Doesn't say anything too controversial, doesn't say anything that's going to piss off too many people unless maybe you're a fan of whatever team is the opposite of what he's talking about right now. I mean, it's just... We don't know anything, and we're not gonna until he's run the team for at least an offseason.
Yeah, that's right. And that was one of the angles I had on this, too. So yeah, Magic, Bird, and Jordan, those were like the three guys in the 80s that were, not David Stern, not Silver. He's the current commissioner. The previous commissioner, David Stern, that's when they really cranked up the PR machine and really brought the NBA into the big money era, right? Magic's been there through all that, so he totally understands it. On top of that, there is a recent article, I don't have it linked because I don't know why, I just don't, but saying basically Magic is the second richest NBA player ever just based on total wealth. Meaning,
well, that wouldn't surprise me. He's a part owner of the Dodgers, right?
That's what I'm getting at, is he's been kicking ass in business ever since he was in the NBA, right? Being a pro sports owner. I think the only one richer than him was Jordan, which makes sense, right? Not only he's an owner, he had all these endorsements and all that.
Well, yeah.
So
Let's wait
Jordan,
and see how much LeBron James ends up with. But yeah,
yeah, sure. He's got that ridiculous shoe contract too, and also has all these businesses. But yeah, Magic knows what he's doing in business, and he has all these connections, and he knows everyone in the NBA, right? And then they also announced quickly after Magic being hired. So he basically replaced Jim Buss as team president or whatever. I don't remember what the title is. And then
vice president of basketball operations.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Interestingly, though, Jeannie Buss is the one who did it right. She fired her brother and Mitch Kupchak, who is basically like one of her brothers. It's a family business. Kupchak's been there for 30 years.
Kupchak's been there for like 30 years.
Yeah, exactly. So she fired basically like her two brothers, and now she's putting Magic in there, who's another family member.
Like,
really.
How many titles has Kupchak won as a general manager?
I mean, all the Shaq titles, all the Pau Gasol and Kobe titles, all those.
Was he there? Was he there for any of the ones in the 80s? I don't know if he's been there that long.
Ooh, he might have been. He might have been right? Not the GM, but like
this might be, other than Phil Jackson, with titles purely as a GM, I'm sure he's the number one in the NBA, right?
I bet that's true. But just to finish that up, though.
Well, I guess it depends on whether or not you count. No, I can't think of any. Popovich has 5.
He doesn't have a GM title, though, does he?
Well, but he's not just the coach.
Right?
He's also president and vice president of basketball operations, right?
But in terms of, though, the Lakers, who did they bring in to replace Kupchak? Pelinka, who's an agent. And it was also reported that the reason why they brought him in is because they struck out trying to poach Bob Myers, who's the Warriors GM, who is also an agent previous to being the GM. So where am I getting at in talking about, what Magic Johnson and Pelinka have been doing? Well, what I look at the GM position and front offices in general in the NBA, I think there's like 2 major things you need to have. And one of them is just evaluating talent, right? And that's a big one. That's what we talk about the most, just in terms of, these numbers are way off. What are these guys thinking? Well, this is a huge question mark, right? None of these guys have really evaluated talent before. This is kind of what Dre's concerned about in his article, and yeah, this could be a huge disaster. But the other side of it is the connections and getting things done, and that side of it, the relationship side of being a GM. And when you have an agent and a former great, all-time great player who's been entrenched in the league forever, they're going to have amazing connections with players and agents. So
I agree. They still have to make the right decisions. But
they still have to make the right decisions.
They have all the connections they need to, to facilitate.
Whereas I think Kupchak, right? And Jim Buss may not have had those connections. They were, probably not as good. So I can see what Jeannie Buss is trying to do here.
Strikes me as the kind of guy that players did not like.
He's just like the spoiled brat kid, of the patriarch. That's kind of what the impression I get from the reporting anyway. I've never met him, obviously. So yeah. I like the idea that Jeannie Buss has, in going this way, but it's a gamble, and we'll see if it works. And that team does not have any talent at all.
I mean, who knows what'll become of their rookies and their second-year players, but
that's right.
We did like D'Angelo Russell in college a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, that's a small sample size. He only played 1 or 2 years. So who knows? We'll see.
But I mean, they're trying to emulate the Spurs and the Warriors, though, right? Because they brought in Luke Walton, who's a coach from the Warriors. They're trying to bring the Warriors GM, so that's at least a start for them.
It'll be an open question whether or not Magic, in contrast to many of his compatriots from his era, can actually move with the modern game, right? So, you see guys like Jordan seem to be stuck in the 90s, and Phil Jackson seems to be stuck in an older era of basketball. We'll see if Magic is going to move with the times or not. One more thing, and I got like 2 minutes to talk about this.
Yeah, that sucks.
There was a big blockbuster trade that went down that I'm sure everyone else in the NBA is talking about this. I think we kind of okay. Sacramento traded DeMarcus Cousins, right?
Yeah.
Kind of a big deal, big splash. We don't think it's that big of a deal, but we'll talk about this anyway. They traded DeMarcus Cousins and Omri Cosby for Tyreek Evans, Buddy Held, Langston Galloway, 2017 first and second round draft picks, which I'm assuming are slightly protected, but not overly protected.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So yeah, we don't have much
So
time.
first of all,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
there's the reality versus perception. First of all, the wide league-wide perception is that Sacramento got fleeced because DeMarcus Cousins is a star. Is a huge star. The Box Score Geeks take on this is DeMarcus Cousins was a mediocre / good player who's heavily overrated. So from that perspective, I think they got a decent haul for this player. And also, I think there's frankly value for Sacramento in terms of just moving the fuck on, because DeMarcus Cousins is gonna get a $200 million contract in the offseason, and he's not going to be worth it, and you're not going to build a title contender around that, right?
Yep.
So I actually kind of like this trade. I do agree with all the people talking about his perceived value, though, that if they had traded him like a year and a half ago, they could have gotten a fucking king's ransom for him, and so they should have done that. Don't know what was happening at the time. At one point, I think there was a rumor that the Lakers wanted him and were willing to trade like Larry Nance Jr. and D'Angelo Russell and like a draft pick or something like that. Like,
Ingram was the deal breaker, though, apparently.
No, that's this year.
You're saying last year? Okay. Okay.
Rumor about, and that was back when Vivek just for some reason vetoed any ideas about trading DeMarcus Cousins. So I think at the end of the day, I think perfectly fine trade for Sacramento, but they could have gotten more a couple years ago. What's your thought?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And the reporting I've been reading agrees with that the Kings front office have been wanting to move Cousins for a long time. Well, the various Kings front offices, that is. They've been going through them. But Vivek has blocked that from happening until about a week before it happened, and then they finally moved him. So he was the one trying to keep Cousins. But, yeah, I agree with everything you said. You really have to divide the process from the results here. And the process matters a lot more than the results. So the results are fine. Like, Cousins is not that good. They got some value in return. They need to move on. That's great. But the process was apparently pretty crazy for them. That
I mean, the process is just
yeah.
The Kings have been a mess forever, for a very long time, since the Weber years. We all hoped that when Vivek bought them, the process would improve, but it has been just as chaotic under him as it was under any of the previous owners, which frankly doesn't surprise me a ton, because Vivek made his money in technology, right? So it's not like he made money because he was an expert at establishing great corporate culture and corporate processes. He made money because he founded a firm that did some technologically brilliant things. And it's kind of different skill sets, right? So it's not like guys that have these startups and then sell them for billions or whatever tend to start thinking they're experts in everything when really they were just experts in that one thing that they built. It doesn't make him, for instance, a management guru or anything like that. So I don't know. The Kings roster has been a mess for a while. Don't have a lot more to say about that. But in terms of player evaluation, DeMarcus Cousins is not as big a star as you think he is. And the reason, if you're not a typical Box Score Geeks fan and you don't know what I'm already talking about, just take a look at that turnover column and that fouls column, because they both matter a lot. And in both categories, DeMarcus Cousins is one of the worst in the NBA, one of the worst centers in the NBA.
Yeah, unfortunately, he gets a lot of this.
I gotta go.
Let's take us out, Patrick.
You wrap it up, or you just keep talking and I'll leave.
No, go ahead and wrap it up. Let's do it.
Okay, we're gonna wrap it up. We talked about some trades. We talked about so many trades, and we talked a little bit of dirt about Magic Johnson, but not really, because nobody knows yet. We gotta wait. If you got any comments, you want to tell us how we did, you want to say something about it, watch our website, the boxscoregeeks.com. Boxscoregeeks.com. There's no the. I don't know why I said that. Boxscoregeeks.com. We'll be publishing a little article with a little summary of everything we talked about in the next day or two. You can also find us on twitch.tv/nerdnumbers. It's where we broadcast live. You can find us on YouTube probably in about an hour or so after this show wraps. And you can find us on iTunes. Search for Box Score Geeks. You can find us on Stitcher. Have I forgotten anything, Brian?
No, shout out to Andrew Sutton in the comments, one of our regular hosts, and to Dre as well,
Andrew.
Dre Alvarez. You can find him at Nerd Numbers.
Sorry, I should have said at the beginning of the show, Dre's not with us because he's traveling. He's conquering the world, doing something. I'm not sure what he's traveling for, but he's on the road and he's doing great things. And Andrew is not with us. We wanted to have Andrew as a guest on, but he didn't show up to Skype, so Andrew's not here.
He has to work late pretty often.
Okay, hard worker too. Anyway, I don't have any shout outs. I don't really want to do any shout outs today. So I'm just going to say be safe out there, folks.
I've got one shout out real fast. There is a Hoops Hype article called "This is How Trades Go Down in the NBA," talking about mechanics of how the trades work.
Really
and who everyone involved. It talked about some of the trades that happened at the trade deadline here, and also just how trades work in general. So for all you armchair GMs out there, we'll link that article. I liked it.
That was a really good one.
Yeah.
All right, people, be safe out there. Have a good week. We'll see you next week, and go Sixers.